Tonight on KQED Newsroom, we'll talk with San Francisco Mayor London Breed about the city's most gripping challenges, from homelessness to affordable housing. Also, as the Democratic presidential candidates prepare for their first debates next week, Joe Biden faces a firestorm over his controversial remarks about segregationists. Plus, PG&E pays local governments for wildfire-related damage as San Francisco looks to sever ties with the company. Hello and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. We begin our show with the top elected official in San Francisco. Last June, London Breed became the first African-American woman elected as mayor of San Francisco following the sudden death of Ed Lee in December 2017. She inherited a number of tough issues. The city's sky-high rents have raised concerns about growing income inequality. And since 2017, San Francisco's homeless population has grown by nearly 20%. Mayor Breed has unveiled a plan to open by autumn the city's largest homeless shelter in the Embarcadero, despite opposition from neighborhood residents. She's up for re-election this November for a full 4-year term. And joining me now in the studio is San Francisco Mayor London Breed. Nice to have you back here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So you recently proposed your new budget for the coming fiscal year. A big chunk of it is focused on services for the homeless, including more than $100 million in additional funding. What do you plan to use that money for?
So there are a variety of things that we want to use this money for, including shelter beds, mental health stabilization beds, wraparound supportive housing services, permanent exits to homelessness, reconnecting people to their family members through our Homeward Bound program. There's not just one solution to homelessness, but we know that it's something we have to work on a regular basis. Even though our numbers have increased in San Francisco in comparison to other cities throughout the Bay Area, if we don't continue to invest in these particular efforts, things could potentially get worse. And I think that making these investments, following through accountability and coming up with regional solutions, and finally building more housing faster is going to be critical to the success of our city's future.
I want to unpack some of this because there's a lot in there, what you're trying to do. Let's start, first of all, by your point that the homeless population is up. It's up by 17% over the past 2 years. We now have more than 8,000 homeless people in San Francisco. Yet the city spends about $300 million a year on homeless services. For all that money that's being spent, why aren't we making more progress?
So let's talk about some progress despite the numbers. Last year, when I was first elected, you saw large tent encampments all over the city. You don't see large tent encampments in San Francisco like you used to. So that is progress, but we know that the numbers are up, and we know it has also a lot to do with the fact that people are losing their housing because San Francisco is not affordable for certain people. And so part of what we have to do is make sure that we invest more money into keeping people housed in the first place and not neglect that community. And so I've invested more money towards keeping people housed, providing rent subsidies, providing right to civil counsel for people facing eviction, and things that are going to preserve housing for people who are basically on the verge of facing eviction. That's just one part of it. I think that has played a role in the increased number of people who are homeless, in addition to the number of people who are unfortunately living in their vehicles.
Yeah. You know, you've probably heard this. Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti is now facing a recall effort over what people there view as his inability to really address the homeless crisis. How much of your re-election, would you say, and your success as mayor hinges on the homeless issue?
I'm going to say regardless of my re-election, regardless of my success as mayor, as a native San Franciscan and as someone who really cares about the city, it's important that we all work together to address this issue. And since I've been in office over this past year, we've helped almost 1,500 people exit homelessness. That's 1,500 people who are no longer sleeping on our streets.
But the city's own tracking data says, though, that for every person who exits homelessness, 3 more enter homelessness. So how will you fight that trend?
And as I mentioned earlier, part of it is prevention. People who unfortunately are facing eviction for a number of reasons, whether it's owner move-in evictions, Ellis Act evictions, or displacement of any capacity. This is why it's so important that we provide support to help pay rent for people rather than the cost after someone's basically evicted, those costs skyrocket in comparison to providing a few months' rent for stabilizing a family or an individual. So preventing homelessness is something that we are really focused on and making more investments in that regard. But the fact is, we need more housing. We need more housing in San Francisco, and we need more housing throughout the Bay Area for different income levels.
And that's why you're proposing a charter amendment.
Yes.
To speed up the approval process for affordable housing. Critics, though, say that it's not really needed because there aren't that many projects being held up right now, and the real problem in their minds is that more resources are needed to buy land and to build homes. And they also say it is important to give the public time to have input and not to speed through.
So Tweety, that's not entirely accurate in terms of the process. Let me just back up and explain. The fact is, we are putting a $600 million affordable housing bond on the ballot this November without raising property taxes, which would provide support for preservation and new housing for low and middle income residents.
And we now see big corporations jumping in as well and trying to address the problem. This week, Google announced it was putting $1 billion toward affordable housing for the community and for its employees. We've also seen Wells Fargo and Salesforce, both based here, put in millions of dollars into trying to tackle this problem. What role do you think corporations should play in funding solutions to homelessness and to the housing crisis?
So I think, for starters, yes, contributions are important to helping in these particular efforts, but they also have to get more actively engaged financially through their companies to provide the resources and input on a regular basis, not just a one-time contribution, but long-term. What is their commitment to ensuring that we not only get this housing built and we support low and moderate income families, but that what's our long-term strategy to make sure that they are invested and actively engaged in supporting the community, but also recruitment from people who live in San Francisco, making sure they're working with kids in our public schools and opening the doors of opportunities to kids living right here in the city and county of San Francisco. So,
but what do you think this does, though? I mean, does it send a message that city officials, the people that have been elected to work on these things, are unable to solve some of the tough social problems, even when budgets are flush? You have a new budget, $12.3 billion, the largest in city history.
So it's not as simple as, okay, here's the money and the problem is solved. There's bureaucracy. When you talk about homeless people, some of them are suffering from mental illness and substance use disorder, people that we are trying to help but don't necessarily have the tools to get them the help and the support they need, which is why I'm really excited about the conservatorship legislation so that we provide someone who is a guardian to make decisions for some of those folks who sadly are suffering from mental illness, who can't make decisions for themselves.
There are those, though, who say that infringes on civil liberties. There's quite a bit of controversy around that.
We understand that, but right now our jails, our hospitals are being used as mental health institutions for people who are suffering from things like schizophrenia or the psychosis that develops because of the drug use. Is it okay to say, well, there's nothing we can do and allow things to continue? Either we need to fix it or we need to allow things to continue the way they are. And I don't accept that. I think that there is a balance that we can provide as a city. Mental health stabilization beds, wraparound supportive housing, the things that we're doing, but some people are not accepting the help that we're offering and they need a little bit more support, and that does require someone to make a decision for them, unfortunately, when they can't make a decision for themselves. Otherwise, we are not going to put a dent in this problem because, again, it's not just one thing. It's a number of things that are creating these problems, and I am proposing comprehensive solutions to help address them. The first time in the history of this city that we have hired a mental health reform director, because we know that we have a mental health crisis in San Francisco, and this is our biggest challenge. We need policies, we need mental health stabilization beds, we need support and wraparound services, we need exits to homelessness, and we need to make the right changes to make the right investments so that we can change how people feel about San Francisco. I want people to feel and see a difference when they're outside walking around this beautiful, amazing city. And the only way we're going to do it is we got to make the hard decisions, and sometimes they're not always comfortable.
All right, Mayor Lyndon Breed, always a pleasure to see you. Thank you for being here. Now to national politics. President Trump says he canceled at the last minute a U.S. missile strike against Iran after he was told it could lead to 150 deaths. The retaliation attack was planned after an American drone was shot down near Iran. The incident comes just days after American officials blamed Iran for recent attacks on foreign shipping tankers near the Strait of Hormuz. Meanwhile, closer to home, presidential candidate Joe Biden is facing calls to apologize after he finally spoke about what he considered civil working relationships with segregationists in the Senate. He has declined to apologize. Joining me now to discuss this and other political stories of the week are GOP strategist Sean Walsh of Wilson Walsh Consulting and Carla Marinucci, senior writer with Politico. Good to have both of you back.
Thank you.
We've got growing tensions with Iran, so let's start with that. They now know the U.S. was planning a missile strike in retaliation for that downed drone. Sean, how dangerous is this situation, and could it quickly escalate into war?
Well, a military skirmish maybe, a full-scale war, I don't think so. So I think if the Iranians take another shot at any U.S. aircraft, patrol boat, or even actually if they mine another tanker in the area, that could lead to escalation. I think it's important to note, though, prior to any of this happening, Iran is teetering on the brink of their own mini revolution internally. They've had unrest in a number of cities over the past year, and the sanctions that the president's imposed are really biting hard. So it's a very unstable situation.
But this is disturbing on a number of different levels. The president can't play arsonist and fire brigade at the same time, which is what Politico is reporting today. The fact is, he threatened them, and then he celebrated the fact that he pulled back on the threat. That kind of dirty Harry routine is not got to be playing well on the international stage. People will start calling his bluff. There's a whole issue there.
And then there are reports now that Iranians are looking at this and going, wait, President Trump blinks first. Maybe we can keep pushing it further the next time around.
Be a tremendous mistake. They tried that back in '88 when I was in the Reagan White House, and it cost them half of their Navy. They got smoked. So if the Iranians push this issue too hard, we have all of the weapons and all the capabilities to do so. So I think really, from Mr. Trump's perspective, I think he will be criticized, just like Mr. Obama put the red line in the sand and backed off. He spoke to the American people why he did it. He was roundly criticized. I think Mr. Trump is being criticized now. But don't mistake the fact that we do have our finger on the trigger, and we've got lots of targets to pull the trigger if we need be.
All right, let's talk about the presidential election as well. We've got the debates coming up in Miami next week, the first presidential debates. President Trump officially launched his re-election campaign on Tuesday with a rally in Florida. And, you know, he told Time magazine he may not even bother courting swing voters because he thinks that his core supporters, he's confident that they can propel him to a second term. Will his base be strong enough to give him another 4 years?
I don't think so. You had 69,000 votes that decided the race. You had a lot of people who really, really disliked Hillary Clinton. Now you have a lot of people who really dislike Donald Trump, particularly amongst women, which I think is his biggest problem. So the bottom line is this speech was only to his base. It was almost 80 minutes long. He offered nothing new. So, you know, my concern as a Republican is what does it do to Congress? What does it do to the parties all across the country? I think it's a flawed strategy.
That's right. I mean, the base being anywhere from 33 to 40%, that's where his polls have been. It is a dangerous strategy. I think the Democrats know that, but I think the Democrats have danger too with this huge field that they have. What is their message? What is the attack going to be on Trump? And what is the issues? I think that they're going to pound most importantly as they go forward in these debates. They need to be talking about jobs, blue-collar workers, and all the things that Trump did very effectively in the last election. There's a lot of concern among Democrats themselves that Trump may be heading toward another re-election based on the Electoral College, as he did last time, unless they get their messages together. And we're going to see that in the debates coming up.
And so would you say that it's very critical, this first debate? And then how do the candidates set themselves apart? You know, there are so many of them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've got Kamala Harris. I think she sets herself apart. She's on the stage on a night when she has Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden, Pete Buttigieg. It's going to be her mission as a woman of color, as a U.S. senator, as a former prosecutor, to set herself apart from those competitors. so far, she's had mixed reviews at doing that. She's been static in the polls. She needs to have a breakout moment in those debates.
Do they have distinctive differences when it comes to some of the most pressing issues of the day? Immigration, economic inequality, immigration, and health care.
Well, I think when you have Bernie Sanders defining himself as a socialist, yes, there are differences. And now this is the chance for all of these candidates to define themselves regarding their differences. This is where Harris has an opportunity. And I think we're going to see Biden and Bernie Sanders go at each other in these debates. But look, Elizabeth Warren is the one who's on the rise right now, and the one that those two leaders in the polls have got to watch out for. She has produced plans on a number of different issues, very specific plans, and she's been really, really good at retail campaigning, as we saw here in Oakland recently.
I think these debates are basically the equivalent of the auto show at the beginning of the year. All the models are in the convention center at the same time.
They all sparkle.
They all sparkle. You get a chance to look at them. I think Warren's the big winner so far. She drew the first night, and she didn't draw all the major players, so everybody's going to attack her. She's on a good footage. She also, quite candidly, is drawing from the same crowd that Bernie Sanders is, so having them on separate nights helps. Joe Biden could potentially be the big loser because, as he has done time and time again over the past month, steps in cow pies.
And well, let's talk about that. The latest one being the segregationist issue. Some of the candidates, especially Cory Booker, have been pouncing on his recent remarks about past working relationships with segregationists. How much impact do you think this will have on his current status as a frontrunner?
This is Joe Biden's biggest challenge. When you have decades of experience and votes that you have to explain, and the news media, or my organization included, looking back at those with a fine-tooth comb. He has been unable to explain and apologize for a lot of these incidents, and he hasn't shown a lot of flexibility in being able to do that. I think he has alienated particularly voters of color out there. He's going to have to make up some of that ground. There's just a lot of competition here and a lot of elbows that are going to be thrown. And as the front runner, this is a problem he has.
It's his race to lose.
Yeah, it is his race to lose. And this is the problem he's going to have. He's got to come out of these debates with a sense of momentum and strength, and they are going to be all over him. I agree with Sean on that.
Sean, what do you think his main challenge is on these things? Because he's also had issues with women feeling like he invaded, their personal space. I mean, it's not the first time he's been caught in these kinds of situations. Is he just generally out of touch with the current culture where there's more emphasis now on issues of racial and gender equality and the Me Too movement?
He's an almost 80-year-old man who reverts back to case. So he goes back and talks about his old stories over and over again, and maybe the public, the youth, has moved beyond him. So it's not just grabbing women at events and being uncomfortably close. He steps on the abortion issue with regards to the Hyde Amendment. I think that's a devastating potential problem for him with young women in this race. He brings himself forward with these racial issues. He's got a whole host of problems, and guess what? His opponents didn't do this to him. He did it to himself. This is Joe Biden time and time again. But this time, I don't think kind Uncle Joe is going to be able to get away from himself.
I still think when it comes to Donald Trump standing next to him, Joe Biden, whether he has problems with women or issues relating to reproductive rights, may have not.
But you hit the head. So the bottom line is, he's banking on the fact that he's going to be against Trump, but you can't get to the end of the game before you play the game, and he's got to play with the Democrats.
All right, we'll leave it there. Sean Walsh with Wilson Walsh Consulting and Carla Marinucci with Politico, as always. Nice to have you here.
Good to be here.
Thank you.
We turn our attention now to PG&E. The company has agreed to pay $1 billion to local governments after a series of wildfires were linked to its power lines and equipment. The funds are intended to help cover damage spread over 14 cities and counties. This includes losses from last year's Camp Fire that killed 85 people in the town of Paradise. In January, PG&E filed for bankruptcy for the second time. Environmental activists want San Francisco to abandon the company altogether and install its own public power system. Joining me now is KQED data reporter Lisa Pickoff-White, who has been covering this story extensively. Lisa, always good to see you.
Lovely to see you, Tweety.
So we'll talk in a moment about that $1 billion settlement from PG&E. But first I want to ask you about this morning news. Governor Gavin Newsom announced a new plan, a multi-billion-dollar insurance fund for utilities. How will it work?
So what will happen is the idea is that both investors and ratepayers through bonds will pay into this fund, which could be up to $21 billion. And then if utilities lines cause a fire, for instance, what we saw in the Camp Fire and other fires from 2017 to 2018, then wildfire victims would basically be able to get money out of that fund. However, the catch is that if the utility is found negligent, and that is why the fires were started, then investors would have to pay money back into the fund. And the reason that we're even talking about an investor fund in the first place is partially to placate Wall Street. So PG&E says that they applied for Chapter 11 bankruptcy because of the high liabilities that they faced from the fires. They said that their credit rating was put down to junk bond and they couldn't borrow money anymore. And so that's why they were entered into bankruptcy. And so this governor is hoping that this fund would basically stop that from happening again in the future.
So what about ratepayers, though? Are they going to be on the hook for any of this insurance fund?
Well, critics that I've spoken to, including former CPUC President Loretta Lynch, do say that this is a little bit of a bond bailout, similar to what happened in 2001 during the last bankruptcy. However, it depends. There's also some other safety measures that are hooked onto this. For instance, compensation to executives. Also, each utility be reviewed by state regulators. The California Public Utilities Commission would have to receive a certification. And then there's also some specific language that seems directed very much so at PG&E. So they wouldn't be able to join the fund until they exit bankruptcy and until they pay out settlements from 2017 and 2018 wildfire survivors.
So a lot of ifs.
A lot of ifs there.
So speaking of wildfire survivors, this only applies to future fires. So how are the survivors of the wildfires that have already happened? What is their reaction?
My colleague Marisa Lagos spoke to some this morning, and they, for the most part, thought that this was good. They say that they're happy to see a way for people to get paid out in the future, and they're also happy to see the safety measures and the state looking at that kind of thing. However, there are critics who are worried about how much money this is going to end up charging ratepayers in the end.
And at the same time, Governor Newsom is also seeking regulatory changes that would allow utilities to more easily have ratepayers cover the cost of wildfire damage. Consumer groups have not been happy about that. They've been very vocal about that. What are the biggest challenges Governor Newsom is facing right now as he is trying to balance holding utilities accountable while also ensuring that the state has a reliable power grid?
It's very complicated. We saw some movement on this actually this week at the California Public Utilities Commission, and they announced that they are officially looking at 4 proposals, for instance, to restructure PG&E. One would be to break up the company to a gas and electric division. Another would be to basically renew and keep looking at certifications to allow it to operate as a utility more frequently. Another would be, once again, to tie executive bonuses to safety measures. We're seeing that a lot. And so these are kinds of ways, and the other would also be to actually, right now, PG&E is technically owned by a holding company. So there's a board and then kind of another board, and so this would restructure that.
So let's talk about that $1 billion settlement from PG&E. What will that money be used for? How are cities and counties going to spend that money?
Well, they say that they're going to use it to rebuild and restructure their communities, and they're hoping to receive that money soon. The Mayor of Paradise says that they really like it, as quickly as possible.
Is there a timeline for it?
Hopefully within a year, but we're still looking into that. What that doesn't cover, though, is the lawsuits that are moving forward from businesses and individuals against PG&E.
With all these problems swirling around PG&E, there's been talk about San Francisco possibly separating itself from PG&E and having its own power utility. Has there been much progress made in that? What are some of the challenges?
Well, I mean, it's a lot of work to take over a utility. And what we're really talking about is San Francisco buying from PG&E the very power poles and the lines that you see in the city, the infrastructure, exactly. San Francisco also already actually has its own power company, the Hetch Hetchy Power, that they've been running. But that only serves a very, very small amount of buildings. And they say that they could run their own utility at a cheaper and a safer way than PG&E. However, this has come up in San Francisco a lot. Actually, San Franciscans have voted on public power 12 times and rejected it since the 1920s. I think this time could be a little different, though. A lot of people are very involved, and the San Francisco Public Utility Commission says that they think that this is the best choice for the city moving forward, and they are looking further into this.
Well, just real quickly, how much would it cost and where would the money come from to set up its own power system in San Francisco?
It would cost billions of dollars. The SFPUC is very upfront about that, and it would come from bonds. So San Franciscans voted on a measure last year that would allow the city and county to issue bonds to buy some of that infrastructure.
All right, a lot still in play as this whole situation makes its way through the bankruptcy court as well. Lisa Pickoff-White, KQED data reporter, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Before we go tonight, I have a personal note to share. This is my last episode as host of KQED Newsroom. It has been such a privilege to be invited every week into your homes and cars, for those of you who listen on the radio. We launched this show 6 years ago with an ambitious mission to bring you news with more analysis and deeper insights from policymakers and stakeholders, people who can break through the noise and help us better understand all that's going on in the world. I'm grateful for the amazing team that works so hard on this show every week. Grateful for the wonderful guests who have become regulars. Grateful for the opportunities I've had at KQED. And I'm incredibly thankful for all of you for having joined me on this journey, telling me not only when I did things right, but when I could have done things better. I'm moving on to other adventures, and I'll share more about that in the near future on my social media. In the meantime, I hope you'll continue watching. Thank you. And we leave you with some of my favorite moments from the past 6 years.
Jackie Britton flew all the way from London to be a Flaming Lotus girl. Jackie's what the group affectionately calls a minion, ready to take on any task that's needed.
So I'm curious, what kind of kid were you?
So I spent a lot of time on my own drawing, and I think it was probably my social awkwardness that got me into this business, because for me it was easier to draw someone than to talk to them.
So Foldscope is an origami microscope.
Oh, is that the bug I'm seeing?
That is the bug that you're seeing.
Okay,
You see the little legs?
Yes,
got a little
it
squashed.
looks really gross.
Our country was under attack in 2016, and I was afraid that the American people would not fully understand the hacking, what happened.
We now have the Me Too movement sweeping the country. Have things changed?
I think it's a turning point. Why? Because I think enough women have come together and said, we've had enough.
Let's look ahead. According to some polls, many Americans feel our best days are behind us. How do you feel as you look to the future?
I don't believe it for 1 second. Our best days are not behind us.
Come see me tonight.
The
Come
performer.
See me at the Regency. Yes, please.
Isaac Mizrahi, so nice to have you here.
I adore you.
Likewise. Thank you.